Welcome to the School of Athens by Estelle and Leah.
Making philosophy more accessible to younger people. Hi!
Hi, everybody.
I'm Estelle.
I'm Leah, and we're back with another philosophy lesson for you.
And today we're doing arguments from reason, the ontological argument.
So, you know that we already touched upon God's existence or religion in general in the previous episodes. And this time we thought, we'd just dedicate a whole episode to the ontological argument and also Pascal's wager. Yeah, we'll just get right to it.
So what is the ontological argument? It's an argument first proposed by Anselm, and he argues for the existence of God from the concept that a being that which no greater can be conceived, and that's God. So I'll just lay out the premises and conclusion. So God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived of. So what exists in reality is greater than what exists in just our understanding, and that's the first premise. And the second premise states again, God is that which nothing greater can be conceived. So conclusion is that God must exist in reality, because what's in reality is better or greater than what just exists in our imagination. And that logically, using reason, sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but there are obvious counter arguments to it.
Yeah, just as a background, Anselm, he lived in the 11th century, so that wasn't really a time in Europe where the existence of God was openly questioned. And I think it was also something pretty new to find actual reasons to believe in God and not believe in him simply out of faith. But still, this argument, if you look at it closely, it doesn't really make sense because it seems like you can basically apply the same logic to almost anything,
Gaunilo actually offers an example as a counter argument, and it's his lost island refute. And he says that basically if you just sub in a lost island with God, it doesn't make sense, because say the lost island is an island that which no greater island can be conceived, and it is greater to exist in reality than merely as an idea. So if the lost island does not exist in reality, a greater island can be conceived of. So therefore, the lost island exists in reality. But it follows the same logic as Anselm's argument, and a whole lost island, the whole thing is that it's lost, so it doesn't exist in reality, but it proves that it exists in reality according to logic. So it just shows the inconsistency of Anselm's logic.
Yeah, and Anselm even answered to this saying that this logic basically only applies to God because he's the one and only necessary being. But then it's almost like saying, God's existence is needed to prove, or is one of the assumptions you make before you try to prove God's existence. Begging the argument in philosophy if you assume the thing that you're basically are going to prove or are trying to prove.
Yeah, and Kant talks about this a lot as well, because he says that how existence can't be a predicate. And as Leah just said, you can't say just because God is a necessary being that he therefore exists. That's not something. It's you can't beg the question.
Yeah, exactly. But I think Kant kind of takes the argument up and just changes it a little bit, because he says, if God existed, then he would be the greatest being in existence. But that doesn't mean that he does exist. But he does acknowledge part of the argument.
Kant says that existence, it doesn't add to the essence of the being, but it just indicates its occurrence in reality. It's just it's not part of the definition of God, well, it shouldn't be.
I think the approach to try and find reasons for believing in God is generally a good one. But yeah, this argument doesn't really convince me, at least, and I think it doesn't really many people today. But it's still interesting to kind of look at the historical background, we can see, for example, Pascal, he lived in the 17th century, and there the like attitude towards religion was already very different. So that what he is doing with his like approach to defend religion or God is, yeah, as I said, like it's already defensive. It's not really just trying to prove the existence of God, but it's trying to actually convince people or
Mm.
answer to critics, because at that time there were already more critics than during Anselm's time.
And so, like as Leah said, it's more to convince people, and Pascal's wager is rather convincing because the advantages of believing in God is like, or worshiping God is that you receive like life after death, you go to heaven. Whereas if you don't believe in God's existence, like you could risk going to hell and
Yeah,
experiencing eternal punishment according to Christianity. But like if God does exist in the end, you get the reward of being in heaven. But if God does not exist in the end, then heaven and hell doesn't exist. Like either way, like there is nothing bad for you. If God does exist, it's like a win-win situation.
yeah.
Whereas if he doesn't exist, you don't really lose anything. I think that's the essence of his wager, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's four scenarios. So basically, believing in him only has advantages, because if he exists, then not only did you lead a good life because you followed like morals and had like a community and stuff, then that's already a win, and you also get to go to heaven. And if he doesn't exist, then you still have the advantage of being a moral or morally good person. Whereas if even if you don't believe in him and he doesn't exist, you might end up like leading a bad life because you didn't really do anything good and maybe didn't even have a community.
Mm-hmm.
Like he exists and you didn't believe in him, then that's really bad.
At the end, like there's nothing bad that can come out of believing in God, right?
Mhm.
But what do you think? Are you would you find that convincing, and now you want to believe in God?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's mainly like two things that I don't really agree with. First, that we think that the two scenarios are like almost equally likely, or like in the wager, it's kind of presented as if they were equally likely, and I don't think that they are. So, I don't know, it almost like in the scenario, it ends up being obviously the best choice to believe in God, because it seems just as likely that he exists and that he doesn't exist. But because I think it's so much more likely that he doesn't, the wager doesn't end up like giving the same results, you know?
Mm.
And the
Yeah,
second thing is that I would criticize his like idea of leading a better life with religion, because there's many things that religion doesn't necessarily have to give you. I mean, you can lead a moral life or like a life with community and happiness outside of religion. While like many of the wars in Europe, for example, were a lot of the structural problems like all over the world come out of religion. So I think there's like almost more negative sides to it than positive ones. I don't know.
and also like just the fact that you're believing in God because of this wager, like because you want the
Yeah,
benefits out
exactly.
of it. That's I feel like that's a not a very pure reason for faith, and I don't think if God exists, I don't think He would appreciate it that you're believing in Him because of this thinking. Like
Mhm.
God, like Christianity emphasizes in like purity and intention and like faith. And if it was the God that it's described in the Bible, like I don't think He would give you that reward in the end anyway, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, no, yeah, I think you mentioning the reward is really important because, as you say, like we don't really know whether we actually get. I mean, like just because we read in the Bible, for example, that we're going to heaven if we do this and that, and like if we don't, then we go to hell. Uh, I think there's almost like another question, like, do we believe in the Bible? You know, additionally to like, do we believe in God?
Mm.
Because you don't really know if the God that ends up like maybe possibly existing is the one that we read about in the Bible. So like you could also end up going to hell or whatever, like if that even existed, um,
Yeah.
if you believed in him. So I don't know.
And then just like this is going slightly off this specific topic, but just about like
That's fine.
Christianity and faith in God in general. But like, if you were born in a society where you didn't know that religion existed, or you haven't had access to church or Christianity or the Bible, how would you, how would you ever to realize that you could have faith in God? Like,
Mhm,
but
exactly.
you are still a good person. You are still leading the good life in quotation marks. You're still, I don't know, selfless and loving and all that. I think this is called like being an anonymous Christian. But this belief that not all people believe in, the fact that anonymous Christians would still be rewarded in the end. And yeah, like it's just,
Yeah, that seems unfair, kind of. And that
yeah,
you end up like going to hell or heaven depending on where in the world you were born, for example. Like, it just
yeah.
doesn't seem right. Even if I believe in God, I don't think that's what it would be like.
It's not very omnibenevolent of God.
Mhm. Exactly. So that's already a reason not to believe in the wager, I think, or not
Yeah.
trust it. Again, like just to generally like put it in a historical context, I think it's interesting, how quickly that changed, first of all, going from strictly faith to coming up with reasons or for believing in God and then actually having to defend him. And
Mm.
but I think what is really cool about the wager is that it really asks what are the advantages for us people to believe in God, or like maybe almost like what is the influence of God on our lives?
And just like going back to the ontological argument, I feel like there's so many aspects in arguing for the existence of God that sounds almost ridiculous because, like, at the end of the day, it's just God's character or what God what God is, or at least what people define him to be.
Mhm.
That's what everyone's arguing for. Like the definition, a lot of people use this as an example. The definition of a bachelor is that he's an unmarried man, and like people apply that reasoning with God, saying the definition of God is he's omnipotent or all knowing, or that he has a necessary existence, or he's a greatest being, and that's always used as the argument itself. And I think that's just one of the key reasons why I find arguments for the existence of God like hard to like believe or like find convincing.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I get that. Also with the calling him the greatest being or arguing with the definition of greatest being, I think is also problematic because I mean the word great is something that we kind of made up, right? We like just
Yeah.
use it differently also in different cultures. So what does it even mean for a being to be great? Like, why does it necessarily, I mean, it does seem right that existence is for like greater than non-existence, for example, but like why? Like, why do we think that, Or just omnipotence or questioning what we mean by great, I think is also important when we consider like the ontological argument.
Yeah, and Descartes also said like defines the argument. Descartes says how existence is perfection and then God is perfect, so God exists. But like you can say, I think the term is syllogism. You can say how Santa is a man and man exists, so Santa exists. It logically seems to work, but it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then you kind of have to see where in like which proposition the mistake is. And I think for Descartes, it's
Mm.
just the like notion of perfection. What does that mean? What kind of something we just, yeah, I mean, it's a socially constructed term. But also, I mean,
Yeah.
Descartes also says that he can't be a deceiver, for example, because I mean, he also says, God is perfect, and because of that, he can't be deceiving me because then he wouldn't be perfect because he wouldn't be good. Because why do you need to be good in order to be perfect? So it's kind of similar,
Mm. That's
right?
interesting. And so just to recap, today we talked about the ontological argument, and we talked about its counter arguments, and we've sort of reached the conclusion that the argument doesn't work, even though it seems to logically make sense, because you can't use existence as a predicate and you can't beg the question. And we also talked about Pascal's wager and how his intention was more to like convince people to believe in God, but that's still not convincing enough because it's an almost impure way of believing in God.
We are probably going to talk about the problem of evil in the next episode, so we're going to extend this short series about God to 2 episodes. So see you guys next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Yeah, bye.
Yeah, bye. Thank you for coming to our lesson.
We hope to see you again next week.